Hey there, folks. Episode 11 of Because I'm Carlos podcast. I know it's been a little bit since the last episode, but one of the things I committed to early on when I started doing these audio versions is that I didn't want to just create an episode for the sake of creating an episode. A lot of the episodes themselves, while being inspired by something contemporary that's happening, usually stick on universal themes. I try to stay very broad in terms of that because I don't really want to be stuck on having to be timely, having to create a podcast just as, some piece of news is happening or something is dropping. Now, lately, because it's been a little bit quiet as far as news in the sports card landscape, it's actually been a little bit chill the last little while. I haven't had too much in terms of inspiration for specific topics to base off of, a current event. But that doesn't mean that I haven't been percolating on some more general topics as well that are just things that I've been working on lately or things that I've been thinking about. And that'll be this episode. So I think a lot of the focus will remain on the general idea of trying to refine and curate a collection. And that's what this one is going to be talking about because recently I have put a couple of items up on eBay and sold a few items. I actually shipped one out yesterday. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit and how that plays into the curation of a collection. So it's a bit of a more broad topic, a little bit more of a collector topic, which I like to do those, especially when the opportunity presents itself. So since it has been a little quiet from that perspective as well, it's meant a little bit of a gap between episodes. We'll see how that goes going forward. If I've got more of these general topics, I'll throw these in as well. If something does come up though, I'm happy to throw a couple of episodes together. But what I wanted to talk about specifically is the reason why I sold that card and why I have a couple of others up for sale. And it really plays into the whole personal collection thing. So when we're talking PCs, one of the episodes that I did earlier on in my YouTube channel was establishing all these different buckets. And the majority of the buckets were based on stuff that was out there with the intention of selling at different risk factors. But one of the points I made early on is that even inside of the PC bucket, which I made the very first one in the little diagram that I created for it, I said that even inside of the PC, there is some nuance there and there's some fluidity. And this is what I'm going to kind of elaborate on in this audio version. Now, PCs are not all created equal, but they're also not all the same in terms of how people treat them. I've always had the idea that there's always an element of fluidity. There's certain things that are pretty much standard for me, ones that are sticking points that I am happy to just continue to go forward with year after year or month after month or whatever the case may be. One of them, for my example, would be the Mike Modano collection, just because that's been a cornerstone of my PC. But over time, it's evolved in terms of what I consider to be stuff that I want to include as part of it. And I will say, as part of the recent sales, I did actually sell a Mike Modano card. But in that instance, it was actually a duplicate. So I've continued to grow as far as unique items that I've added to collection. If I have an extra or a couple of extras, well, then it's a good opportunity to move something. The specific one that I sold was actually a card where I had bought a nicer version of the patch. I had upgraded the patch, therefore there was really no sense of me keeping another copy. And that's kind of the philosophy that I take towards the collecting side of things. And that is, I'm not out here trying to build a warehouse. I really just want to collect what I want to collect. I want to curate the collection I want to curate. And if I find myself having stuff that no longer fulfills a purpose, and this is going to come into play with these other collecting categories I'm going to talk about inside of the PC side of things, if it doesn't fit what I'm trying to do anymore or what I'm trying to do at all, then I'm more inclined to let it go because I'd rather just not be holding up some of my money in terms of owning a physical item, because that's really what's happening if you really think about it. And this is just a perspective thing. You can treat it however you want to treat it. I don't put too much emotional stock into possessing an item. For me, it's got to fulfill like the enjoyment of the process. That's a big thing for me. It's not just having the items. It's the process of getting them. It's curating them in a certain way. It's building the collection that I want to build, a collection that I'm happy with. And a couple of weeks ago on my YouTube channel, I mentioned that I was doing a collaboration, and I did. I did a collaboration with a YouTube channel called Sports Card Anonymous, and I went on there and I chatted with Dakota on there, with the host, as well as kind of with the audience, and we talked about a couple different things. And one of the points that I made there, which I'm going to reiterate now, is that to me, a personal collection, a PC, really comes down to what you want to make out of it. I would much rather have a PC that I'm happy with than a PC that other people would envy or that other people would want to follow or whatever the case may be. It's got to be satisfactory to me. I could have the collection that everyone else envies and drools over, but if I'm not happy with it, well, then it's got to go. Basically, that's kind of the way that I approach that thing. So in that spirit, I'm always evaluating. I'm always considering how I want it. The Modano collection has been easy because I've always pursued it and adjusted over time to my expectations and kind of the areas that I'm interested in. A lot of what I pick up today is really, does it look cool to me? Does it fit? Is it something that interests me? If the answer is yes, then I'm interested. And then I base what I'm going to offer or whatever the price is going to be based on that. And for the other collections, though, it follows a lot of the same. One of the other categories that I fall into, so like I said, I'll put the Medano collection over to its side. It's been a staple. Another staple of my collecting is vintage. Now, I've gone through a whole evolution as far as the vintage side of things, and it started off with the aspirational goal of having complete runs of tops and Bowman. Well, that's become cost prohibitive over time. It's not really a reasonable thing anymore. And the reality is, as I've had more time to kind of think about it, the truth is there's a lot of those sets inside of those runs that I don't particularly enjoy or I don't particularly like. I've been able to get cards from a lot of those different sets, starter sets and stuff like that over time. And some of it just doesn't excite me. And if it doesn't excite me, then devoting the energy, the time, and the money that could potentially be required in order to get that, then doesn't seem to me like a good idea. And that plays a little bit into what I was talking about as far as cards that I'm selling. Some of them are cards that I picked up that I had wanted because I was planning on pursuing future projects. And I've taken on the philosophy that I want to get certain star cards in some of those sets in order to help me build them. But then as time went on and it became clear that I probably wasn't going to build that set after all, then it became a lot less interesting to keep them around. Now, I'll elaborate more on which cards specifically ended up being part of the sale, because one of them, like I said, I shipped off just the other day. But the point is that you have to be flexible and willing to move around a little bit. Now, that differs a lot from the kind of the approach that I took early on in my collecting career, which is to say that I had this idea in my head that I was going to pursue all the projects simultaneously. Today, it's a little bit different. Today I may still have projects that I intend to get to at some point. That doesn't mean that my want list today, because my want list today is a lot tighter, a lot narrower than it was back then. That doesn't mean I don't have other aspirations and other plans. The way I look at it is kind of the way that I do inside of my working life, which is you've got your projects and things that you're working on right now, but then you've got other things that are inside of what they would call a roadmap. So you may have a project down the road that you're going to be working on, and then a project after that, and the roadmap can go as long as you want it to go down the line. As a collector, you kind of have your own roadmap, and maybe that'll be what I'll call this episode, a collector's roadmap. But the thing is that when you think about your roadmap, it doesn't just mean the projects you're working on right now. It means projects that you're going to be working on going forward. And you want to be considered and deliberate in kind of how you approach that, with the understanding that you may change your mind. Obviously, your tastes may change. You may become less enamored with certain things. You have to be flexible to opportunities where maybe something catches your eye and you're actually excited about it. The excitement is a good piece of being a collector, is that you want to be excited about what you're pursuing. It shouldn't feel like a chore. It should be fun. And you want to leave room for that kind of spontaneity and that kind of fun. But it is nice to have a little bit of a roadmap and a vision of where you'd like to go with elements of your collection. So when it comes to the vintage side of thing, I started off with the idea that I wanted to do these runs, and then over time I narrowed it down a little bit more. I started to remove sets and things that weren't interesting to me. Well, then it became unnecessary to keep, because I had a nice little run of Mickey Mantle cards that covered a lot of these sets. Well, when it became clear I wasn't going to do the 1963 top set, then keeping the 1963 Topps Mickey Mantle didn't make any sense anymore. And the same for the 64, and the same for the 65, and so on and so forth. So while I had copies of those in my possession, it made less sense to retain them going forward. And that's kind of the approach that I'm taking. That isn't to say that I'm still not going to be collecting certain sets. I still have certain ones that I enjoy, or ones that I still kind of aspire to, or that I have a number of cards sitting there. But it's one of those things where I've got my projects I'm working on right now. And then when those are completed, or when they're close enough to completed, I can then initiate and start continuing work on those other ones that I've kind of got down in my roadmap going forward. Now, that said, the biggest part of moving some of those cards forward, and like I said, down the road, I'll talk more about which cards and which, because I'm still in the process of kind of filtering through and finding other items that will probably be on the chopping block, so to speak, as well. It's not that I don't like them anymore. It's just that they don't fit into what I'm trying to do right now. Once I kind of gave up the idea of doing the set, it no longer made sense just to hold the cards for the sake of holding the cards. So for me, the roadmap concept falls into just understanding, look, I've got a finite amount of resources, a finite amount of time, and a finite amount of money that I'm willing to devote into my collection, which means that I can't afford to just be holding cards that I'm not really going to look at anymore, because they're not going to be part of a project I'm going to be working on. I got them with a certain idea in mind. I've abandoned that idea, and then here's this card just sitting in a box gathering dust, so to speak. That doesn't make any sense to me. There are some that I would still retain, because to me, they're like iconic cards. They're cards that I still want for just their own sake. regardless of the rest of the set. So those ones still make sense for me to hang on to. But that's the really critical, eye that I have to put towards it to kind of focus my attention on where it matters the most and push my resources into the section that makes the most sense. And that's really what you kind of have to kind of decide for yourself. And in the same vein, that left the door open for considering other projects. That's how the whole 1997 Bowman Best Cuts Atomic Refractor insert set came into play. It was something that wasn't on my radar. I happened to catch a couple, and I bought one from an Albert Bell. I bought an Albert Bell version of from that set, and I liked it. And then I thought about it some more, and I looked at the checklist, and I go, well, the checklist only has 20 cards, but it's kind of a who's who of the 1990s hitters, and I'm a big fan of that, especially 1990s baseball. And I thought to myself, that'd be kind of a cool set to put together, and I did. I was able to get most of it pretty quickly, and it took me a little while to find a couple of the cards, and a couple of them were a little bit more expensive. And then the last one to finish things off was a Derek Jeter. And now I've got a nice little 20-card set. I like it. I've had the chance to look through it a bunch of times, and I still enjoy it. And, I haven't figured out exactly kind of how that's going to play into that section of the collection, but I may very well get a shoebox that literally on the outside of it says, cool, shiny 90s baseball cards. And that could be something that goes into it because that nice little set falls right into that little category. And like I said, a PC itself can have these little tranches, these little subcategories themselves, where you can, it's kind of whatever whatever makes you happy, whatever you're going to enjoy. And I get a lot of enjoyment when I look at that set. And in the same vein, I thought to myself, another little group of cards that I could put together that's a set, so to speak. Again, I'll elaborate more as I'm a little further along in that project, but it inspired me to kind of think about what was next in that section. And I was able to come up with something that I thought would be both challenging, but also kind of interesting. I could make a little bit of progress, but then certain pieces would be a little tougher to come by. Some of them are a little more expensive. So it's not something that I can make a snap decision and just, I can't just go to eBay and hit buy it nows and buy everything. Even if I have all the money in the world, they don't always come up. There's a little bit of a scarcity to it, but not so much that it will never come up. It's challenging, but it's not ridiculous. It's one of those things, it meets that kind of middle ground that I kind of look for as far as potential projects. And it still stays firmly in that mid to late 90s theme that I'm talking about. Like I said, I'll elaborate some more about it later. But it was just, as soon as I saw it, I said to myself, like, yeah, you know what? That seems like something kind of fun that I would love to put together. That would be kind of cool. And it'll definitely be something I'll look into and doing. So I've started that process of studying and doing a little bit of research. And I've picked up a couple of pieces. So I'll have some stuff coming in that'll be in upcoming mail days on my YouTube channel. So it'll become very clear in short order kind of what I have in mind. But I want to leave it as a bit of a surprise until that starts coming onto the channel itself. Like as always, the Because I'm Carlos YouTube channel will be the hub where a lot of this stuff will come. But that is one of many projects that I've got on the go, but not too many projects. And that's really the point of that whole roadmap concept that I was talking about. It's the idea of not having too many things on the go at the same time. The reason why I outlined it as a roadmap rather than just a big checklist is that I don't want to be working on all those projects at the same time because that's what I used to do. I used to go into this idea, and the idea was interesting because, well, then you're getting mail all the time. It's kind of cool getting cards all the time. I love mail. It's like, Christmas morning, but you could have it all the time during the week. But the downside is, well, you're expending a lot of money probably because you're buying a lot of stuff all the time. Even small items do add up if you buy enough of them in enough volume. And the other aspect of it is that while you're getting a bunch of cards in and it's fun having mail days and these big full mail days, you're actually not making a lot of progress. You've got all these sets and all these projects you're working on, but you're chipping away at one, chipping away at another, chipping away at a third, a fourth, a fifth, a 12th, an 18th. And, you don't feel like you're really making any progress on any of them. Well, having a much more narrow checklist of items and projects to work on feels a little better in the sense that, yeah, I can definitely see some progress happening. That's what helped me a lot with that Bowman Best Cut set is that it's 20 cards. So each card is like 5% of the set. So when I get a couple in, well, there you go. That's 10%. That's great. So you can really quickly see some progress and it motivates you. It keeps you engaged in it because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You can do that. So for me, smaller sets tend to be a lot more inviting. I'm not as excited about the premise. That's part of the reason I gave up that whole complete run thing is that I wasn't excited at the prospect of, putting together a 1978 top set. Although I could buy a complete set, which would kind of defeat the point and take a little joy out of it, or a 1973 top set and get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cards, or a bunch of the 60 sets that are 5, 6, 700 cards. It didn't excite me to kind of pursue it that way. The stuff that I've already got well underway, more than likely I'm going to finish that. That's part of my roadmap. But the going forward, starting new sets, I'm going to be a lot pickier in terms of what I'm going to do, and that's just how I control and how I keep the hobby something that doesn't feel like a job or a burden. And that's where that criteria and that roadmap and everything falls into it. That's kind of the process that I undertake in order to really take the whole idea of curation and really take it down to, let me think about what I really would be interested in. Let me think about what would be fun and engaging for me to do and exciting for me to pursue, and to keep things interesting for myself. And that's really kind of the main takeaway, hopefully, that I wanted to get across during this. So that's it for this episode. I want to keep it nice and, a normal length for a lot of these audio versions. I'd love to get some thoughts. If you've got any ideas of any things that you've been pursuing yourself in the same vein, are you in the vein of trying to collect a whole bunch of different stuff? Do you try to narrow it down a little bit yourself? Do you have a little bit of a roadmap? And actually, before I finish this, I do want to make one more point about the whole roadmap thing. Part of the reason why I like that approach is it doesn't preclude you from then having those future plans. In a lot of cases, it can be a situation where I'm working on these handful of projects now, but as I start finishing off a couple of these or approaching the end of that project, I can then begin and initiate some of the future plans as well. So start working on another project. So slowly, as one project fades out, another one comes into play. So I'm always still pursuing things, and it keeps things interesting for me. But at the same time, it doesn't overwhelm me with this gigantic checklist of things to pursue that it's exhausting my resources. In the same vein, like I said, selling off some of my extra stuff or stuff that no longer fits the plan, then it allows me to, replenish the coffers, so to speak. I don't want to keep throwing money in constantly. While I've been doing that for many years, and I've done it because I enjoy the hobby and I enjoy doing that, there is a limit to how long you can do that. I've got other plans and things in real life, shocking but true. I've got other things in real life that I want to be doing as well. So I'd like certain aspects of the hobby to kind of fund themselves. That doesn't mean I need to be spending there, trying to buy everything in order to make huge profits and do that. And I'm not worried about a fully self-sustaining hobby, but I like the fact that some of the stuff that I picked up in the past, if it's appreciated and it doesn't fit any of the projects that I'm going to be working on anymore, then moving it on to somebody else who will appreciate it then allows me then to replenish the coffers and be able to do other things that I would like to do on my side of things. So it's a nice, delicate balance that allows me to be able to do something that works for me. And that may be something you may want to consider in your own side if it makes sense for you. So that's it for this one. Do you kind of subscribe to the idea of, just take all the projects on, build this gigantic checklist of things and constantly have mail coming in? Is that kind of your approach? Do you like the idea of maybe kind of staggering some of your projects? As you're running into the end of one project, you can start adding a new one and so on and so forth. More of a roadmap style, kind of what I described a little bit earlier on. Or do you have another approach, a scattershot approach that you've come up with on your own that makes sense and works for you? That would be one of the things I'd be curious about. So anyway, if you do check it out in the audio version, if there's any place you can leave comments, I would appreciate that. If you're checking it out on the YouTube channel, if you could like the audio video, that would be great. Or subscribe to the channel, I would much appreciate that. Otherwise, you can check out all my stuff at the Because I'm Carlos either audio version or Because I'm Carlos YouTube channel, which is the hub of almost everything else I do. So you can check it out there with the social medias and all that. It's all there. Otherwise, thanks very much for checking it out, and we'll catch you in the next one.